Some weeks, a lot of weeks, the story just doesn't fall into place. All the parts are there, but it just feels stuck. And this is one of those weeks. So instead, we're going to do one of our listener tales episodes. I'm going to make this one a little longer, actually. And you all have some opinions about these listener stories. Apparently, it's quite irritating that I comment along with them. So we're going to try something different. I will be listening to them along with you for the first time, but I'm not going to say a word. I'm just going to let them play. I'll meet you back here at the end just to say a nice bye-bye and maybe comment then about what I thought about the stories. And, I don't know, let me know on Instagram or now on TikTok. Woo, I'm obsessed. Coming very late to the game, but I am in love. I'm at Ghosts in the Burbs, and let me know. Do you like the comments during the stories, or do you not like them? Or do you just not care? All right, here's your first story. Here we go.
Hi, Liz. I just want to say I'm a huge fan, and I have a true spooky story for you. My name is Isabella, and I'm from Mississippi. I'm not going to change the place that this happened, but the names have been changed. So, my dad has an old church on his property. It hasn't been used in a church in like 30 years or more. But my dad uses it for stores mostly, and then we have like family get-togethers and stuff there. So, my sister Jessica and I lived in a mobile home on his property. Well, our fridge had went out one time, and there's a fridge and a little small kitchen in the church. So, we were using the refrigerator in the church to store food and stuff. So, my stepmom has a bunch of old stuff that belonged to her mother that is in the church. She has it all displayed. Well, there's this one porcelain doll. And it's always been a little creepy to me. It's like in a ski outfit and like all wintry looking. And it's really pretty, but then I've just always thought dolls like that were creepy. So we went in the church one night to get some food, me and my sister Jessica. And we were talking, and I was talking about how creepy that doll was. And we were talking about the doll, and I was just, it freaks me out. I don't like it. I don't look at it or anything like that. In the corner of the far wall, and it's like the one big room where all the pews and stuff were. So it's a pretty big area right there. Well, in the one corner, there's a shelf, and the doll was on the top shelf it's like a 4-tier shelf. The doll was on the top shelf. So you have to go all the way to the opposite end of the church to turn the lights off. So we got done fixing our food, and we were going out of the church. Well, my sister went before me, and she was like, hey, go turn the lights out. So I walked across to go turn the lights out, and I turned the light off, and I'm walking. And I get about halfway to the door, and I hear a noise over in that corner. And it sounded like a bang, like something had fallen off the shelf. So I had my phone on me, so I take my phone out, and I turn the flashlight on. And I look over there, and I swear the doll had moved. And I was like, no, there's no way that doll moved. There's no way that doll moved. So I walk over there closer to the doll, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, there's no way this doll moved. No way this doll moved. So I'm getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the doll, and next thing I know, the doll is looking at me. I ran out of the church screaming. I never went back in there until my sister took the doll and put it somewhere, and I don't know where it is now, and that kind of scares me even more. And I don't like going in there because I'm afraid of this doll. I swear, it looked at me.
Hi, I have just a little kind of ghost story from a long time ago when I was in, I think, 6th grade. One spring evening, my best friend and I were outside, and like neighborhood kids were playing, and it was just around dusk. I was going to walk my best friend, Heather. She lived down the street. I was going to walk her halfway home and then walk home. So we started doing that, and the house right next to my family's house had been abandoned for about a year. And that was pretty weird for our neighborhood. A family had lived there who nobody really ever got to know very well. And then I think the mom and kids moved out. And then at some point the dad left, but nobody really knew when. And it was all just weird and mysterious. And so this house had been empty for quite some time. And the grass and the, shrubs were all overgrown. So anyway, we start walking just as we are crossing kind of like the property line where it would be on the street, like my house, my yard, and their yard. We both kind of stop in our tracks as we see the same thing coming from the front door of the abandoned house. And what we saw was this long, tall, narrow, cloud-like figure. It moved from the front door area of the empty house, across their front yard, across the street, right in front of us, probably about 30 or 40 feet in front of where we were. And it just kept going, and it went into the neighbor across the street, into their yard, and then kind of down behind our house in the shadows. And this thing, cloud-like, wispy thing, did not resemble a human. There was no face or limbs. No part of it touched the earth. And I think one of the weirdest things was that it just glided. Like, there was no motion, no like moving, walking or jogging up and down kind of with motion. It was very smooth as it moved. So we just both saw it, which is kind of comforting, to have both witnessed the same thing. But we just stopped in our tracks and each one clutched the other one's arm, and we were just kind of stammering, like, "What is that? Did you see that?" And so the whole thing happened in 10 seconds, maybe, and we stood there for a moment just trying to process, what we saw, what it could have been, what it was. And there was nothing. I mean, we had nothing. There's no way it was a person. And it didn't take long. Meanwhile, it was getting darker, and we just realized, whatever we saw, we still have to just get on with it. So we just ran down the street toward Heather's house, and then she ran home, and I ran home. I told my family about it, and they weren't necessarily disbelieving, but nobody else had ever encountered anything. So, yeah, nothing really came of it. Heather and I we were freaked out, but we didn't feel like there was nothing threatening coming from it. We didn't feel like this thing had seen us or anything. It definitely opens your eyes and your mind to the possibility that there's a lot of things out there that definitely cannot be explained.
Hello, my name is Celine, and I am from Boston, Massachusetts, but have been living in Connecticut for the past several years. This is a true story that happened to me in March and April of last year, 2020. Quick shout out, love the podcast. Completely binged it all last year when I was working home alone, and it was the best. So, wanted to share my story. So my partner and I had been looking to move in March of last year. Not the best timing, but that's okay. So I had always wanted to live in an old mill building. So we found an old mill building that was in our price range, and we went to go visit one of the units, and the unit was absolutely stunning. It was carpeted, but they had plans to remove the carpeting and put in hardwood floor. There were floor-to-ceiling windows. The kitchen was huge and beautiful, and there was so much light, and we have a cat, and I just imagined him sunning himself in the window, and it was perfect. So when we walked in, initially in the living room, as I mentioned, it was carpeted, but there was a large square of carpet that had been removed, and, I asked, what happened? And that was when I had found out that they were going to be putting the hardwood floors in, and, the landlord that was showing us the unit, he explained to us that they had removed that part of the carpet just to see what was underneath. Since it was such an old building, they needed to figure out what sort of insulation and everything that they needed to put in the hardwood floors. fine, great. So, needless to say, we signed the lease, of course. The price was right. We needed somewhere to go. We were worried with COVID. Like, this place was a godsend at the time. So we signed the lease, and we weren't able to see it again until April, because we had to wait for the renovations to be done. So April comes along, we get the keys, we go into the unit, and we open the door, and everything is beautiful. Sunlight's coming through, hardwood floors, new floors in the kitchen, absolutely stunning. And I took one step over the threshold into the unit. We shut the door behind us, and I immediately felt like I was going to pass out. I started feeling sick to my stomach. I had a pulsing migraine in the back of my head, around my neck, radiating up to the top of my head. Just the most severe migraine-like pain I've experienced basically ever. And I just remember crying, just hyperventilating, crying. And it was like I was watching myself from an outside perspective crying. Like I couldn't control my body type of crying. And my partner was just like, what is going on? And he led me into the kitchen, and I managed to get down to the floor, and I was sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinets, and I was just sobbing. And words were just coming out of my mouth that I wasn't even processing in my brain and making myself say. It was like I was just word vomiting, and I was just repeating again and again, this is not our apartment, this is not our apartment, we do not belong here, I want to go home, I want to go home. And, you know, my partner at the time thought I was having a panic attack, and maybe I was. I don't know, I can't explain that. I felt so panicked and so anxiety ridden, and I just knew I needed to get out. So fast forward, we make it home after my little episode, and I'm profusely apologizing to my partner because we've already put down money for the apartment, and you know, a lot is riding on that apartment. You know, we gotta go, right? We gotta move. I tried to calm down, and I couldn't, and I just kept finding myself repeating to him that we needed to find a new place to live, that apartment didn't belong to us. And he just kept explaining, you know, well, it does belong to us now. You're probably just weirded out because, you know, none of our stuff is in there. Once we have our stuff in there, you're going to love it. You know, our cat is going to have a place to sit. And we're going to have our awesome couch in there, you know, all of our belongings, and it's going to feel like home. And I was like, okay, yeah, all right, yeah. And I went to bed. And the next morning, I actually knew someone that was living in that apartment complex that we were going to be moving into. So I asked her to do some investigating just to find out like about our hallway that we were going to be living in, you know, what our neighbors were like, just to get an idea. Maybe more information would like make me feel more comfortable about the situation. And I gave her our unit number, and you know, I turned my phone over and sort of went about my day. I didn't want to be glued to my phone because I was already so anxiety ridden. I needed to distract myself. And I came back to my phone a few hours later, and I had a message from her saying, okay, so we're going to have to stage your apartment. And when I tell you my heart dropped, it dropped all the way down to my toes, maybe even further through the floor. And I said, why is that? And she proceeded to explain to me that in February of that year, so a month prior to when we had went to visit the apartment initially, the man that lived in that unit had committed suicide, and he wasn't found in the unit until several weeks later. I looked up the man's obituary, and everything lined up. The dates lined up, everything lined up. I had to fact check it. I couldn't just take, you know, her word for it. I needed to see it for myself, and there it was right in front of me. So, needless to say, you know, we did not move into the apartment. We were able to transfer our lease to another apartment in the complex, and we've been living in that new apartment without any issues, knock on wood, ever since. So that's my story. Hope you enjoy. Happy haunting season.
Hey Liz, this is Kaylee, and I have a spooky story for you. So growing up, my family had a bunch of antique furniture in our house. Some of it came from my Nana, and some of it my mom bought out at antique stores or wherever. And one of the things that we had in our house was an old deacon's chair. And I can send a picture if you guys want, but for those that don't know, which I didn't until I was pretty old, a deacon's chair is usually in a church where they're deacons. I don't really know what their job is, but that's my limited knowledge of what a deacon's chair is. So they're associated with the church. What we didn't know at the time was that this particular deacon's chair had come from a church in Wales that had actually burnt down. So that leads into the spooky story that I have. So I was pretty young. I was probably about 4 or 5 when I actually saw our ghost, and we called him Deacon John because we figured out that he was associated with the chair. He was probably a deacon. And the reason why we knew that was because our cats would freak out every time they walked past the chair. They'd be hissing and all floofed up and just really didn't like it. So we thought, okay, there's something going on. Trust your pets. I was really young, and, kids see ghosts all the time, I guess, which is just wonderful. Now that I'm older and thinking about having kids, I'm terrified. So I would see him pretty frequently, and when I saw him, he was wearing a long, either black or blue kind of robe or cloak or something like that. He looked relatively young. He looked in his 30s. To me as a kid, he seemed like an adult, but he also seemed like a young adult. I mean, I would say that 20s or 30s is young. So every time I saw him, he didn't really seem threatening, although I was a little kid, so I was obviously terrified that there was some random guy in my house that nobody else could see. So one of the times that I saw him that sticks out the most, I was asleep in my room, and I would usually sleep with my knees tucked up to my chest because I was a little anxious kid, and I was facing my door, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw Deacon John standing next to my bed, and he had his hand kind of over me, not touching me, but over me, and he was swinging this incense or smoke ball that he had around his neck back and forth, and he seemed like he was praying or just saying something over me, which, looking back as an adult, kind of is a sweet thing, I guess, where, maybe he was praying over this little kid. So he thought he was doing something really nice. But to me, as a little kid, I was terrified. I started screaming and crying, ran, but probably threw him into my parents' room, freaking out. I was so scared. So that was one of the times that I saw him. Another time, I remember I would see him at the top of our stairs pretty often. Like, he would be going down the stairs, and then my sister and I would go up the stairs, and we would see him, and we would say, nope, never mind, and run out of there. So, looking back, it's a little bit more lighthearted. In the moment, it was terrifying. And ultimately, my parents decided that they needed to do something because they were like, our kids are getting totally freaked out. They're hearing footsteps on the stairs when no one's there, or upstairs when everyone's downstairs. Both my parents wear glasses, and they would see reflections of somebody walking behind them when they were home all alone. Just really creepy little things kept happening, and obviously the animals were freaking out. So my parents made the decision to try and send him on. To the best of their knowledge, we're not really religious, so it was kind of just hey dude, you're in our house and you're scaring our kids and you're scaring us. And my parents said that they kind of said that out loud in the room They didn't really know if he was there or not because they couldn't see him. But they said, hey, you're scaring our kids. We don't think that you mean to scare them, but we want to let you know that you've passed on and you got to go find the light or whatever's next. But you don't belong here. You're stuck somewhere that you don't belong. You need to move on. And we never heard anything strange or saw anything in the house again. Another kind of interesting close to the story, I had this puzzle that was like a farmyard when I was little. And one of the pieces was of the sky with the sun and the clouds and everything. Obviously big pieces because I was a little kid. And one time I put it up on top of the deacon's chair because there was like a lid that you could flip up and then you could store things on top of it. And I put it up there. I didn't know that my parents had sent him on because I didn't even know what that meant. But I had put it up there, and when I pulled it back down after they had sent him on to wherever, the sky piece was missing from my puzzle. And I was a pretty meticulous kid, so I wouldn't have lost it myself. We couldn't find it anywhere in the house. There was no reason why it was gone, but it was gone. And so I kind of like to think of that as him taking it on and saying, okay, this is, I went up into the sky or wherever, just kind of a really spooky, but also really kind of lighthearted, sweet story. So thank you for the podcast. I love it.
Hi, Liz. This is Chelsea. So when I was a new nurse back in 2008, I was working on a telemetry floor. And the new nurses typically have to work the night shift, and that's what I did. My floor was a very big unit. There were about 40 beds, and it was 2 long hallways. And you could only enter from one side. So if you had patients at the end of the hallway, you were kind of secluded by yourself. And the story was that that particular corner at the end of the hallway, those rooms were haunted. And of course, the older nurses would embellish, a little bit and tell some stories and try to scare us new nurses. Well, one night I had patients down at that far corner, so I was essentially by myself at the nurse's station and with my patients down there. And I had a patient, and she was an elderly patient, and she was sick, but she, was comfortable, able to talk to me, could take care of herself for the most part. And when I went to check on her to do my rounds, she said she wanted to get ready. And I was like, okay, I wasn't really sure what she was getting ready for. I thought maybe she meant bed because it was it was evening time. And she's like, yeah, I want to brush my hair. I want to put in my false teeth. I was like, okay, that's fine. I can help you do those things. And she wanted to put on her eyeglasses. And then she asked if she could put on some of her jewelry. And I was like, okay, well, it's not really for me to tell you not to. So sure, I'll help you get ready. So I did. And the evening went by like a normal evening, taking care of my other patients and things. And it was probably sometime after midnight, and my patient passed away. Now, she was a do not resuscitate, so there was no intervention. But she passed away, and it was a little bit of a surprise, but not a total shock. So I had to call her daughter and let her know what happened. And when I did, her daughter told me that she wasn't surprised at all. And I was like, oh, really? Like, why were you surprised? How did you know? And she said, well, my mom had called me earlier in the day and told me that her brothers and sisters and her mother came to visit her. And I was like, really? I didn't know that she had any visitors today. And she was like, no, all of those family members are dead. I was like, oh. And she was like, yes, my mom didn't want to tell you or the other hospital staff because she was afraid that we would think she was crazy. I'm like, oh my gosh. And the patient's daughter told me that her family members told her to get ready, get dressed, because they're going to take her. Super creepy, because that's exactly what happened. I've had a lot of other creepy stories, but that one will stick with me for a long time. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, I want to tell you a story about something that happened when I was attending one of the local community colleges several years ago, and please excuse the dog shuffling noises in the background. So for reference, this is not, an austere university with an impeccable record and beautifully kept grounds. It looks more like a badly put together office building. It's all kind of grody, grayish, bluish carpet tiles and kind of dingy white floor tiles and fluorescent lights is kind of the scheme going on inside. And about the only thing you can say about the campus is that at night you can see the rocket from the parking lot, and anybody from the Huntsville, Alabama area will probably know exactly where I'm talking about just from that description alone. So at the time I was going there, they had a graphic design course that took place, I think it was somewhere between 9 or 10 o'clock at night is when the class started. So I was frequently not getting out of there till 10:30, 11 o'clock. If not maybe a little bit later. Probably a little bit later. The teacher was pretty good about letting you go as you finished your work, and obviously you could work on a lot at home if you had the proper equipment. But I didn't, and I tended to dilly-dally, so one night I found myself leaving actually after the teacher had left. I realized that it's rather late and that I should pack up and go. My friend is waiting to meet me. At the time, she would walk over from her college campus and just spend the day in mine because the Wi-Fi signal was better. And then I would meet her upstairs at the end of the day, and we would walk over through an industrial area because we are very smart people in the dark to her dorm where we would stay the night. So I leave the classroom, and I notice from the corner of my eye that a man comes out of a classroom behind me. And I think, he must have also stayed late working or studying or doing something, and realized that the building was probably about to close. So he, is leaving at the same time. But as we're walking down the hallway, I notice something a little bit odd. He never passes me. And the only reason that's odd is that I have kind of a bad leg, and I walk pretty slowly for the most part. So most people who are in a hurry and trying to leave are going to end up walking past me in most situations. And he never walked past me, and he never really seems to get any closer. He just sort of keeps the same distance following me. The classroom I was in was downstairs. It was a 2-story building, so it was downstairs at the back of the building in all of its spooky, flickering, badly installed fluorescent lighted glory. And where I needed to go was at the front of the building on the first floor. So I am walking down the hallway with this man following me, and trust me, at this point the song Twisted Nerve is just playing on a loop over and over and over again in my head. We get to the stairwell, and by the way, just so you know, going into it, there are exactly 2 doors into this stairwell. There is the door on the second floor, and there is the door on the first floor. Those are the 2 doors. There are 2 options. So I go to the door and I open it for him because, for one thing, we're in the South and you are expected to be polite to everyone at all times, at least to their face. And for another thing, I kind of want this guy to stop following me So I take the opportunity, open the door for him, and he does eventually pass me and go up into the stairwell. And he kind of waves at me. I still don't get a really good look at him. Not that it would matter. I also have that facial blindness issue that I think he mentioned in an episode. So even if I had seen his face, I certainly couldn't recall it, especially at this late date. So he goes up the stairs. I hear him walking up the stairs, and I hear him leave out the door at the top of the stairwell. And I'm like, oh good, this man is gone. Thank goodness he didn't, wait in the stairs for me or something weird like that. So I also go up the stairs. I come out the door, and my friend is waiting for me near the stairwell door because she knew that's where I was coming out at. And I mentioned something as like, oh, hey, did you see that guy or something like that? And she went, what guy? And I said, the guy who came out like probably 30 seconds before I did, that guy. And she said, no, there has been nobody here all night. Well, I mean, not all night, but, there's been nobody there for the past little bit. The only person she has seen coming out of that stairwell was me.
In 1965, I was 5 years old. We moved into the following house. It was moved to its current location so that a high school could be built. The house and school are still occupied. Not until I was about 12 did I overhear my mom telling my aunt about Mrs. Smith. Mr. and Mrs. Smith were previous occupants of the house. Mrs. Smith was bedridden. Often, Mr. Smith would bring women into the house to the bedroom that was occupied by my parents. My mother would wake up to a silhouetted woman weeping at the foot of the bed. If my mother got up to try to comfort her, Mrs. Smith would fade away. My father never experienced Mrs. Smith. My two brothers' bedroom was where Mrs. Smith was bedridden, the room next to where her husband brought women. Often my brothers would see Mrs. Smith standing in their doorway just as my mother would see her. They, being teenage boys, simply flipped over and fell back to sleep. My parents were very social and often were away for the weekend. My brothers and I would be in the den watching TV and hear the kitchen cabinet doors open but never close. We just figured because the cabinets were made of wood and we lived in the southwestern part of Virginia, humid summers, they were popping open due to being swollen from the dampness of the humidity, but also kept happening all winter long. Once when my brother's girlfriend was over, we were watching TV, early 1970s model, and the silhouette of a woman walked in front of the TV. The TV show still played, but as she crossed it, it would static snow her silhouette. When she heard the explanation, the girlfriend never came back. Only once did I witness Mrs. Smith. My brothers had moved out, and I would often sleep in their room. I was in bed facing the doorway, and a weeping Mrs. Smith appeared. Like my mother, I rose to comfort her, and she walked away into the wall that led to the den. My mother was raised Catholic in Germany. She consulted a priest. He told her to sheetrock my brother's bedroom door and make another opening into the den, which we did. We never heard from Mrs. Smith again.
Hi Liz. In your spooky listener stories, there was a story from a woman in Canada who said that she had an experience where she'd heard her sister come home before her sister actually came home, and it immediately reminded me very much of a phenomenon that is known about widely in Norway, where I'm from, and also in, I think, Scandinavian folklore in general, called vardøger. And it's almost like deja vu, but in reverse. So it's an experience where you can hear or see or even communicate with or smell, apparently. I haven't experienced that myself, but a person before they actually arrive in the location where you can see, smell, hear or talk to them. And I know that we say that the person who has vardøger is the person that you can hear or see before they actually arrive. And my mother has told me previously that it was something that I did quite a lot, apparently. I mean, I didn't do it necessarily, but she used to hear me come home from school and unlock the front door, step into the outer hallway, take off my shoes, take off my jacket, bang the inner hallway door open, and she would look out to see me, and I wasn't there. And I wouldn't arrive for maybe another 10, 15, 20 minutes. And when I did, I would do the whole thing over again, the whole rigmarole, only this time I was actually there. And it would be the same kind of noises and everything as when I had arrived, before I arrived. I know several other people in my family have had vardøger, wherein people have heard them arrive and seen them arrive before they actually have. And I've had a few experiences where I've heard my father, for instance, drive into the driveway of our old house, and I've heard him bang the car door and, you know, stop the engine and everything and come up the steps, unlock the door, and then there's nothing, and it's complete silence. And while that experience in and of itself can be a little bit scary, it's never a negative experience, I don't think. It doesn't have any negative energy or anything about it, but it certainly is strange, and it's weird, but I think everyone I know that is Norwegian knows about it, and most people have some kind of experience with it, and it just sounds a lot like the story that your listener was telling you. It sounds almost exactly like the same thing, and I'm wondering if maybe it is, and if it's a global spanning phenomenon that, you know, might have old roots. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, that is very cool. That is wild. To imagine that that's just something that happens all the time everywhere. Very cool. Thank you everyone who called in and shared a story with us. That was a really good batch. I meant to mention in the beginning that I don't know what's going on. Some people have left stories and they were really garbled, and other ones I just couldn't hear. The audio just wasn't good. Some cut off for whatever reason. They don't show up in order on this Telby thing, online thing. So if it comes out of order and I just can't figure it out, I can't include the story. I'm sorry. Or if it's garbled, or, you know, if the audio isn't good. So if you don't hear your story, that is likely the reason why. I'm very sorry, because I'm so appreciative of you guys calling in and sharing these awesome spooky tales. All right. That's it for this week. I'm going to see you back here next Friday. Same place, same time, hopefully with a new Ghosts in the Burb story. Until then, good night, sleep tight, and don't forget your nightlight.